Okay, I wanted to clarify one thing about the logical part here. Especially notice that you have two conjunctions, right? So how does that relate then to the structure like we see here? Well, we've said enhancement. A, B, which was, and you must learn to hold on to it loosely. So what follows here, when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. These two clauses, C and D. So you'll notice we put it as a kind of enhancement, so as paratactic. It's enhancement because it means as a result, all right? But then when we have the when describes the relationship between 4C and 4D. So you'll notice over here, C is, again, it's a kind of enhancement. It's when. What is the main clause? Well, the main clause is D, that is the alpha, and C is the beta. A and B, and you must learn to hold on to it loosely. How? Remember I said enhancement. Think of it in terms of where, when, why, how, all right? Sentences 5 through 8. Now again, this is part of the kind of analysis. You're assembling it, all right? First of all, it's going through the clauses, identifying what are the clauses. So on July 14th, 1996, an angel was brought to this earth, her name, Danielle Marie Gibson. One clause. But I only know her as Puff, okay? So that's part of the sentence. 5A, 5B. But what about the next three? Her smile is as wide as the universe. 7. Her eyes, they glimmer like stars. 8. She is my world and my sister. What do you notice about 6, 7, and 8? All about his sister. Theme, as theme.
On July 14th, 1996, an angel was brought to this earth. Her name, Danielle Marie Gibson, but I only know her as Puff. Her smile is as wide as the universe. Her eyes, they glimmer like the stars. She is my world and my sister.
That continuous thematic progression, you'll notice, gives that sort of paratactic sequencing here of 6, 7, and 8. They form one block. Now, when I talk about a block of text, I've also used the expression a functionally significant span. How do you identify span? How can we identify 6 through 8 here as being together? What links them together? It is that continuous thematic progression. When you use a continuous thematic progression, you bring it together. It's repeating the same thing. Well, that's one way we identify a functionally significant span. Continuous thematic progression. How else? Well, a functionally significant span must also be cohesive. It exhibits a particular pattern of grammatical choice. Maybe it's a kind of same process, a process of doing, or maybe it's the process of sensing, repeating something that makes it cohesive. We talked about cohesion the last time. Well, cohesion identifies a functionally significant span of text. Now, where does coherence come in? How these functionally significant spans, how these blocks of text all fit together. Like what we see here. This is coherence. It is looking at it in terms of the relations then between those spans. To what extent do they all contribute to the meaning that that author is willing to put forward. All right, so let's take a look at our analysis. An angel. On July 14, 1996, an angel was brought to this earth. An angel was brought. What is that? That's passive voice. And so the angel, an angel, his sister, is in the ED role. I know her. Okay, these are straightforward. Relational is. I glimmer. Glimmer, I was having a bit of difficulty to decide, really, what process type was. Glimmer, I take it to be the behavior of a star. It glimmers. What is one feature of a behavioral process? It is intransitive. It is a single participant only. Theme. On July 14th, 1996. That is putting the circumstance as theme. You'll notice that I've included another category here, and that is called displaced. Displaced theme. What does that mean? What is theme? Typically, the grammatical subject is in the first beginning slot, right? But when you push it out, as you've done here on July 14th, 1996, you put the prepositional phrase, you put that first. That's theme. That's the circumstance as theme. Remember, we are saying that the theme can be a process, it can be a participant, it can be the circumstance. And in this case, the circumstance pushed the subject out. That was a deliberate choice. All right. In terms of logical structure, well, very simple here, all simple sentences. And then in this one, A and B, again, it's paratactic, a kind of extension with but. I only know her as but, the alternative. Okay, extension is a kind of alternative. It can be addition, alternative, and so forth. So we notice his sister is thematic constant. Simple clauses. There's rhyme, earth, puff, universe, stars. Now, sentences 9 and 10. The shift away from the sister to himself. I, just 4 years old at the time, learned what it meant to love selflessly. For on days in which my strength was but knee-high, seeing her smiling face would make my soul fly. Okay, so now it's all first person. It shifts to I. I, just 4 years old at the time, learned what it meant to love selflessly. You'll notice here, there's a sort of a double embedding here, to love selflessly, as a kind of, again, embedded rank-shifting clause to another rank-shifting clause. How? Why? Well, because, in fact, to love selflessly is functioning almost like a noun phrase. We can say to love selflessly means what? So it fills this grammatical slot here in terms of basically functioning like a nominal group, a noun phrase. And inside this, which is, again, learned what it meant. This whole clause here, again, is telling us what was learned. For on days in which my strength was but knee-high. Now, I repeated the 10a here because really this is what? For on days Again, we have an embedded clause in which my strength was but knee high. This all is the what SD? For on days. It's the circumstance SD. It's telling you the time. So this whole part here is the circumstances theme. And then the clause continues. And then 10C. What is 10C? Seeing her smiling face. It is the subject, it's the grammatical subject. When you put the clause into what is basically a noun phrase, into a slot, and it behaves like a noun phrase, that's when you say it's rank shifted, it's embedded.
I, just 4 years old at the time, learned what it meant to love selflessly on days on which my strength was but knee high, seeing her smiling face would make my soul fly. But
Now, we're not going to go as far as the but we can see there is a turn. It changes. But well, let's take a look at this. We're looking at 9 and 10. We finished looking at 5 through 8. And this was about his sister, and this is about himself. Shift now to first person. I learned. And then B and C, what it meant to love selflessly, this all part here, that is what I learned, all right? Learned as a mental process. Meant, I'm taking as a mental process. What it means, meaning as something which is something you sense. You could substitute and say what it is to love selflessly, right? And be the verb to be, and be relational. But I think that the choice is significant here. It's not the verb to be. Now I would take the what it means. It means it has a sense. And that sense is something that you know. Okay, again here, you'll notice 4 on days, in which my strength was but knee high, so 4 and then embedded with B. It displaces what? Seeing her smiling face. That whole thing is the topical theme. It is the subject. It is the clause as theme, but it is basically functioning as the grammatical subject. But I put it here in the displaced column. So we have a lot of embedding here, not a great deal of other things going on, except in 10, A and D. A, seeing her smiling face would make my soul fly. I took that as a kind of enhancement. Result, make my soul fly. So a kind of outcome, a kind of result. Simple clauses, some rhyme. Now, leading up to that, but do we see anything common about these? We notice a number of simple clauses. We have occasional taxes, meaning parataxes, hypotaxes, mainly parataxes. We have conjunction, and we have some rhyme. So this block seems to have a certain consistency about it. But though, marks a turning point. Now the but here is marking a turning point between 1 through 10 and what follows, 11 through 15. It isn't just between the clauses. It is between these two blocks of text. But on March 23rd, 1997, I've been ground bound because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars right next to God. But I was left here to manufacture wings out of tears and broken dreams. but. Obviously a textual theme. On March 23rd, he keeps putting the dates in. He's outlining the history, and that is what he puts as theme. I've been ground bound. What do you notice about that? I've been ground bound. Passive voice. What about here? I was left here. Passive voice. He isn't the active one. He is the one that is on the receiving end of what is taking place. He left Earth to go back home amongst the stars right next to God, but I was left here to manufacture wings out of tears and broken dreams.
March 23rd, 1997, I've been ground down because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars right next to God, but I was left here to manufacture wings out of tears and broken dreams, yet I'm still haunted by these nightmares because...
Now you notice that the tempo of his voice is picking up a bit, all right? He's becoming a bit more, we could say, emotional in what he's saying. What do we observe here? Well, again, ground bound, left, mainly material doing kinds of processes and so forth. Textual theme, but is very important. And then the topical theme on March 23rd, as I mentioned, repeats the use of time as theme. All a kind of enhancement, all right, hypotactic enhancement. We have March 23rd, 1997, ground bound because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars right next to God. Okay. B and C, because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars right next to God, to go purpose, all right? Again, I was left here to manufacture purpose, kind of enhancement. And 14 and 15. This is 13. I'm still haunted by these nightmares. Well, very complicated. Let's take a minute to look at that. Yet I'm still haunted by these nightmares because I have a really creative mind. And sometimes it designs these alternate realities where she is still here, still alive. Okay, that would be embedded, that would be right-shifted. And all the things I wish we could have done are played again and again and again, and I'm tired of playing God because I gotta come to terms with the fact that my sister ain't never coming back. I mentioned the shift is from active voice to mainly passive voice. Been ground bound, was left, haunted.
I have a really creative mind, and sometimes it designs these alternate realities where she is still here, still alive, and all the things I wish we could have done, I played again and again and again, and I'm tired of playing God because I gotta come to terms with the fact that my sister ain't never coming back.
You'll notice 13. What I did was I looked at the number of content words per sentence. Sentence being two clauses put together. And you'll notice that the number of content words, now those would be non-grammar oriented words, no prepositions and so forth. These would be nouns and verbs and so forth. If I count the number of content words, you'll notice 13 really peaks. And we'll notice here, yet, and, but it begins with cause, and then cause, meaning because. Sentence 13 stands out because of its greater clausal complexity. It is so much more complex. And the sharp peak in lexical density. Now I looked at it in terms of the number, the clauses. This is 13b. And the number of words, 59. How long that him speaking is 18 seconds. That meant words per second, 3.2. Words per minute, 196.6. You'll notice that at this point, he is speaking much faster. Much faster because the clause, there's so much information there. And he is going on, and it's all part of one sentence. A bit too complicated to go through with you here. I'm going to ask you to go through it, look at it when you can look at it more on the screen and see the sides better. Then 14 and 15, you'll notice slow back down. So it's just here where it peaks, right where he says, he talks about, but it changes, and 13 is where it actually peaks in terms of he's speaking faster. It is obviously much more grammatically complex. There are many more words that are being said. Then he concludes it, and that's the cost of love. Caring for someone so much that you can't imagine living life without them, staring at a grave like, how about I trade my 6 feet for yours, but that's not real. No embedding here. It's basically clauses that are combined, some hypotactic.
And that's the cost of love. Caring for someone so much that you can't imagine living life without them. Staring at a grave like, how about I trade my 6 feet for yours, but that's not real.
And again, I'm going to leave these for you to look at. If you have questions, let me know. 14, notice something changes. Increased use of hypotaxis instead of parataxis. Caring, that clause. Staring, being, like.
And I know I said earlier to hold on to love loosely. So when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. But this pain and these memories are all that I got left of you. I won't ever regret these scars. I'm just trying to hold on to them.
Again, I'm going to leave these for you to look at. We note the increased use of hypotaxis instead of parataxis in these final clauses. You notice at the beginning, he talks about to hold on to love loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. But then he comes back down in the end, the last sentence, to hold on to love loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. He repeats it. So what he's saying at the beginning, he repeats. He comes full circle. At this part here, he talks about being 6 feet tall. It's repeated, 6 feet. The use of rhyme. When I take a look at the whole thing and look at rhyme, sentences 1 through 10. In 11, 12, 13, and 14, there is no rhyme. But when we come back to 15, there is. When I take a look at 1 through 10, it's largely simple clauses. From 11 onwards, it's mainly complex clauses. When it's paratactic, is up through 12, largely paratactic, hypotactic, 13 through 15. And then when it gets to really talking fast, and that is in 13. So what we notice is the presence versus the absence of rhyme. The simple versus complex clauses. Paratactic versus hypotactic. Elevated speed, lexical density. And it all comes here. All of those features. What he has created here is a background against which 13 stands out. And it stands out in every respect. He obviously is putting that attention on that part where he is feeling it most intently. He begins with the same sort of hold on to it loosely. He ends in that. What he's done is he comes full circle. But when he comes back, it's with a different outlook on life. That's what we are looking at, is where can you find a consistency? Where does that break come? Where does it stand out? And where it stands out is where the poet has foreground, brings it out to you, makes you pay attention to it. That's where the poet wants to really get his point across. What is kind of verbal art? What is the craft in verbal art? The craft is to be able to, first of all, create a pattern, to create a consistency that belongs to that text. And then, out of that, highlight one part that is going to get your attention because you're going to be drawn to it, because it's going to be different, it's going to contrast with what you have seen. That is the difference between what we call the automatic. And in verbal art, what the poet does, the poet creates an automatic and then de-automatizes, breaks the automatic. Well, let's take a look at another example. And this is David Foster Wallace. He gave this commencement speech. As I mentioned, it's at the top 10 commencement speeches, ahead of Steve Jobs, all right? Who is David Foster Wallace? Probably you haven't heard it. You've heard of Steve Jobs. Now, why did David Foster Wallace? He's a writer. He's a postmodern American writer. He writes novels. Those novels, probably you haven't read. They're difficult to read, all right? But they're supposed to make you think. Time magazine, in talking about his commencement speech, said this address at Kenya was vintage Wallace, a smart, occasionally meandering discussion of the issues that consumed him, from the banality of life to the meaning of consciousness. He said this, I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy and grandly inspirational. He concluded his speech, what it is, so far as I can see, is the truth, the capital T truth. It is about life before death. It is about making it to 30 or maybe 50 without wanting to shoot yourself in the head. All the reasons Wallace didn't make it to 50 are apparent here. He committed suicide after he had this, not immediately, but 2 years later after his commencement speech. In hindsight, the speech reads like the first draft of a suicide note for an author who took his own life last year at age 46. While it is a macabre read, there's tons that's worthwhile here. The speech crackles with wit and intelligence and offers tricks for escaping the depression to which Wallace ultimately succumbed. The reason he committed suicide, he suffered from depression. He did since he was in university. And he was on medication to deal with his depression. But then after he was very successful with this, with one book that really stood out and won a lot of awards. And he wanted to write the next book. But as he was writing, he felt he wasn't able to be as creative And he thought the medication was what was holding him back. And so he went off the medication and subsequently committed suicide. It's also on the cover of Newsweek.
Greetings, thanks, and congratulations to Kenyon's graduating class of 2005. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" This is a standard requirement of U.S. commencement speeches, the deployment of didactic little parable-ish stories. The story thing turns out to be one of the better, less bullshitty conventions of the genre. But if you're worried that I plan to present myself here as the wise older fish explaining what water is to you younger fish, please don't be. I am not the wise old fish.
That's how it began. Well, how did people respond to the speech? Well, we can see something of that from the report in Time magazine, put it at the top.
Perhaps the most sad and poignant of my examples tonight, and this is I always shudder a little bit when I read it, is David Foster Wallace, who was a great writer. He was a novelist, an American novelist. At least I don't have any idea, frankly, how well known he was across the world. But in America, he was one of the leading lights of postmodern novelists and writers, and he was highly respected and loved. A couple of years ago, he committed suicide in his late 40s. Not too long before he committed suicide, he gave a commencement address at a liberal arts college. And this commencement address, as soon as it was given, was noted by many people as being unusual because David Foster Wallace, like a lot of postmodern writers, is impenetrable. He's a very hard, and when you read his work, you have no idea what it means. You're supposed to sit and discuss it and think about it, and that's it. That's the point. Many folks pointed out that this commencement speech was very, very lucid, unusually lucid and direct and accessible. But it was not long before he killed himself. And listen to this.
Okay, again, we're looking for what stands out. We're looking for what sort of is that de-automatization, all right? Now, what stands out are the briefly simple clauses. This is not a matter of virtue. And you can see that here. Just prior to very complex clauses, very lexically dense, which in fact express his main message.
Please don't worry that I'm getting ready to lecture you about compassion or other directedness or all the so-called virtues. This is not a matter of virtue. It's a matter of my choosing to do the work of somehow altering or getting free of my natural hardwired default setting, which is to be deeply and literally self-centered, and to see and interpret everything through this lens of self. People who can adjust their natural default setting this way are often described as being well adjusted, which I suggest to you is not an accidental term. Given the triumphant academic setting here, an obvious question is how much of this work of adjusting our default setting involves actual knowledge or intellect. This question gets very tricky. Probably the most dangerous thing about an academic education, at least in my own case, is that it enables my tendency to over-intellectualize stuff, to get lost in abstract arguments inside my head, instead of simply paying attention to what's going on right in front of me, paying attention to what is going on inside me.
So again, you'll notice that there is this is not a matter of virtue. He almost like signals the fact that he's about to say something important by using a very brief sentence. He does it here, 15, and then followed by 16. He does it here, 19, followed by a very long clause complex here, in which the complex clauses really contain his important stuff, but he prefaces them with these simple clauses.
There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in human history. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day. You get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day, you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day with all the time. Then you remember there's no food this week. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge overlit stores, confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, et cetera, cutting stuff out for the full ceremony. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who was overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, you pay for your food, and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot. And then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of your graduate's actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line. Or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair it is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. The automatic way that I experience boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priority. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stuck and idling in my way. It's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am. And that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious, painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort. And if you are like me, someday you won't be able to do it, or you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 2 straight nights holding the hand of her husband dying in bone tubes. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk in the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped her spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate under the default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell type situation that's not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force of living stuff. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing.
Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, then I'll talk about this.